Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So happy to have you here today. Happy October to every one of you who like Halloween as much as I do. Finally, the most wonderful time of the year has arrived. Before we get into today's story, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you on the great support on my last video of Skylar Niece's story. I received a lot of great comments, I received very nice feedback from you, and I already got a few new subscribers, so thank you very much to every single one of you. I really appreciate your support. So today we're going to be talking about one extremely popular case. It was already extremely popular before. I think it is one of the most, I would say, top 5 most famous true crime cases in the world. But it recently received even more attention and more popularity because a new Netflix series has been released just a couple of weeks ago, and I feel like everyone is talking about it right now. I just want to say also a quick trigger warning on today's video, because we're going to be talking about basically everything today. Apart from brutal murder, we're going to be talking about extreme torture, animal abuse, necrophilia, and cannibalism. I just wanted to say that so you know what you can expect today. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most famous serial killers in the world. Today we're going to be talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was the first of 2 sons to his parents, Joyce Annette and Lionel Herbert Dahmer. Jeffrey's mother was of German and Welsh ancestry, and his father was of Norwegian and Irish ancestry. When Jeffrey was 7 years old, his younger brother David was born. Actually, Jeffrey was the one who chose the name for his younger brother. It is described, and also Jeffrey would later say, that he had a relatively normal childhood, especially in comparison to other serial killers. However, his parents soon started to develop issues in their marriage when he was still a young child. Jeffrey's father, Lionel, was a research chemist and very much preoccupied with his work. It made him very much being absent from home. He didn't have much time for the children. And also his mother, Joyce, developed a strong depression, and she even attempted to commit suicide at one day. So she was also not much around for the children. She was mainly lying in bed. She didn't have any energy to get up and do something with the children. The absence of both of their parents essentially led to a lot of fights between the siblings Jeffrey and David, because both of them wanted the little attention their parents could offer them. Both of them wanted to crave this attention for themselves. Louis Schlesinger, a professor of psychology at John Jay College of Criminal Justice and an expert on sexual serial murders, would later say, "Lots of people have conflicts with their brothers and sisters. Having your mother attempt suicide and become hospitalized is not a pleasant event, but it doesn't make you become a serial killer." Although Jeffrey was never reported to have suffered any abuse during his childhood or any harm from his parents' side from anybody else, he started to develop another very significant red flags when it comes to future serial killers, because he discovered an interest in animal torture. Jeffrey's interest here was not really to abuse the animals itself. However, he developed a very strong interest for dead animals, like the animals that were already dead, especially for their bones. And this is reported to have already started when he was just 4 years old. He saw his father removing some animal bones one day from around the house, and Jeffrey was oddly thrilled by the sounds of these animal bones. He would begin to search himself for animal bones around the family's house, and he grew extremely interested in where these bones were located within the animals' bodies. So he developed an interest for the anatomy of the animal, basically. In 1968, the family moved to Bath in Ohio, and they purchased a home which was located in a very rural area. So it was surrounded by forest, it was surrounded by a lot of green land, a lot of nature. And Jeffrey really liked that, because Jeffrey started walking around the neighborhood and the nearby forest to collect dead animals like dragonflies or moths, and generally all like the skeletons of whatever dead animal he was able to find. On one day during dinner, Jeffrey and his family had some chicken for dinner, and Jeffrey asked his father what would happen if the bones of the chicken were placed in bleach. His father, Lionel, he was very happy about this question, to be honest, because he was a scientist, he was a chemist, and he felt that Jeffrey finally started to have some interest in his work. So he gladly demonstrated to Jeffrey how to preserve bones with bleach. Jeffrey now started also to use the techniques on preservation that his father has taught him on the animal bones he collected, and he basically created his own animal cemetery. He would spend most of his free time growing this animal cemetery. So most of his time he would be outside, he would collect bones of dead animals, and he would start to preserve the bones so he could keep them forever. That was what was going on in his mind, basically. Even though Jeffrey had a small group of friends when he was attending elementary school, due to the family moving around and Jeffrey changing schools from time to time, by the time he started attending high school in Ohio, he became an outcast and a loner, essentially. By the age of 14, Jeffrey started to drink alcohol, and he would even bring hard liquor to the school, and he would start to drink whiskey at 8 in the morning. Roughly around the same time, Jeffrey discovered that he was gay, and he was hiding his sexuality from everyone, including his parents. So not only did Jeffrey discover his sexuality, he also started fantasizing about being the dominant part in a relationship and to have fully control about a submissive partner. There was one male jogger who would frequently run around the neighborhood Jeffrey was living in, and this jogger was found to be very attractive by Jeffrey, and he quickly became the main subject of his fantasies. One day, Jeffrey was hiding in the bushes alongside the road where this jogger would frequently run, and he was holding a baseball bat. He was waiting for this man to pass by, but this man, luckily, he did not go on a jog this specific day. Jeffrey would later say that this was his first attempt on attacking someone. In 1977, Jeffrey's grades in high school started to drop significantly. His parents hired a private tutor to help improving Jeffrey's grades. However, this did not lead to any success. During the same year, 1977, the problems in Jeffrey's parents' marriage escalated. Lionel found out that his wife Joyce was having an affair, and as a result, they both decided to file for a divorce. Lionel moved out of the family house and temporarily moved to a motel. In May 1978, Jeffrey graduated from high school. Later in the same year, also Jeffrey's mother, Joyce, and his younger brother David moved out of the house, leaving Jeffrey, who just turned 18, so he was legally an adult, living alone in the family home. To be honest, I'm not quite sure as to why Joyce did not take Jeffrey with her, but nevertheless, Jeffrey is now living alone in this house, and Jeffrey was like, okay, cool. Now he had the complete freedom, he could do whatever he wanted, and soon his dark fantasies would become reality. Only 3 weeks after his graduation, on June 18th, 1978, Jeffrey was on his way home from essentially somewhere in his car, and he picked up 18-year-old hitchhiker Stephen Hicks, who was on the way to a rock concert. Jeffrey agreed to drop Stephen off to the concert, but he asked him if both of them would like to pass by his house first, to have a few drinks, to chat a bit and listen to music, which Stephen agreed to. So both of them drove off to Jeffrey's house, and they spent several hours in the house drinking and talking. During that time they were talking, Stephen would talk about different girls he liked, and Jeffrey realized that Stephen was not interested in engaging in any sexual activity with him because he was clearly into girls. After a few hours, Stephen wanted to leave to go off to the concert, but Jeffrey, he did not want him to leave. Jeffrey hit Stephen over the head with a 10-pound dumbbell, and while Stephen was unconscious, Jeffrey strangled him to death. He buried Stephen's body in the backyard, and several weeks later he returned to the body, unearthing Stephen's remains and paring the flesh from the bones. Jeffrey dissolved the flesh in acid, and crushed the bones with a sledgehammer, scattering the little pieces around the backyard. Jeffrey now committed his first murder, and he got entirely rid of the body. So 6 weeks go by, and Jeffrey's father, Lionel, and his new girlfriend pass by the family house to pay a visit to the children. So it becomes clear that actually Joyce did not inform Lionel about what she was doing, about moving out, about taking David with her, and about leaving Jeffrey all by himself in the big home. So Lionel comes to the house. He finds Jeffrey basically not doing anything with his life. He was just sitting around. Moreover, he was basically on his own. He was just living alone. And Lionel got worried. So he offered to Jeffrey to pay for his education so that Jeffrey would do something productive with his life. Jeffrey agreed, and he enrolled into Ohio State University with the hope to major in business. Due to his major alcohol problem, however, Jeffrey almost failed every class, and even though his father paid for the first full term in advance, Jeffrey dropped out of college after only 3 months. After Jeffrey's failed attempt in college, Lionel recommended him to enlist into the US Army. Jeffrey agreed again, and he joined the Army in January 1979, and in July 1979 he was already deployed to West Germany. Jeffrey was described as a good soldier, and it seemed like he found some purpose in his life. However, again, his alcohol abuse slowed down his performance significantly, and in 1981, only 2 years later, he was discharged from the US Army. Additionally, it was later testified by a minimum of 3 other soldiers that they were being drugged and raped by Jeffrey while stationed in West Germany. However, this has not been entirely confirmed. In May 1981, Jeffrey was sent to South Carolina for a debriefing, and afterwards he was provided with a flight ticket to any destination in the country which he would choose. Jeffrey chose to move to Miami, Florida for 2 reasons. First of all, he was embarrassed in front of his father for being discharged from the army and for having failed at something again. And second, he was just tired of the cold weather. So Jeffrey finds a job in a deli in Miami, and he was living in a motel. He spent most of his salary, of course, on drinking alcohol, and he was soon evicted from the motel for non-payment. In September of the same year, 1981, Jeffrey phoned up his father and asked him to eventually move back to Ohio. His father agrees to let Jeffrey move in with him and his fiancée. And of course, Jeffrey's father continued to push Jeffrey to finally find a job and to do something with his life. And Jeffrey was actually really trying to find a job at this time. However, he would still be excessively drinking and smoking. Only 2 weeks after moving in with his father, Jeffrey was arrested for drunk and disorderly behavior, and he was fined $60 as well as sentenced to a suspended 10 days jail sentence. In December 1981, Lionel, Jeffrey's father, had finally enough and sent Jeffrey off to live with his grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. He was hoping that the change of the scenery would finally turn Jeffrey's life around. Jeffrey actually really loved his grandmother, and while he was living with her, he did his best to somehow get his life on the right track. See, Jeffrey continued to drink and smoke, but at least he would help his grandmother with chores around the house. He attended to the local church with her, and he would even find a job at the Milwaukee Blood Plasma Center. Jeffrey would work at this blood plasma center for 10 months before being laid off. Afterwards, he spent 2 years without employment before he found a new job as a mixer at the Milwaukee chocolate factory, where he always worked night shifts. On December 8, 1986, Jeffrey was arrested again, this time for masturbating in front of a 12-year-old boy. On November 20th, 1987, Jeffrey was still living with his grandmother at the time. He went to a local bar where he met 25-year-old Stephen Tuomi. According to Jeffrey, according to what he would later say, he did not plan on killing Tuomi at this night, He just wanted to take him back to the Ambassador Hotel, where he rented a room for that night. Just for like some drinks, for some fun times, you know. The next morning when Jeffrey woke up, however, he found Stephen lying next to him dead, with his chest crushed in. And apparently, he had no memory at all of having killed Stephen. Of course, now after the murder, Jeffrey had to get rid of Stephen's body. He purchased a large suitcase, stuffed Stephen's remains inside of it, and took the suitcase back to his grandmother's house. Now, Jeffrey left Stephen's body in the suitcase for 1 whole week. After this week, he began the dismemberment of the body. Similar to what he did to his first victim, almost 10 years ago now, Jeffrey cut the body into pieces, removed the flesh from the bones, and shattered the bones into small pieces with a sledgehammer. He placed the pieces of flesh into garbage bags and basically just got rid of them in the trash. Jeffrey kept Stephen's severed head for another 2 weeks with him before disposing of it as well. Even though Jeffrey always claimed his entire life that he did not plan on killing Stephen and he lost his memory about actually killing Stephen, he clearly found pleasure in committing the crime. And following this, Jeffrey would now go out and actively search for victims. Within the following 2 years, Jeffrey lured multiple young men into his grandmother's house. He drugged these men before he brutally murdered and dismembered them. On May 14, 1990, Jeffrey finally moved out of his grandmother's house and moved into apartment 213, located in North 25th Street, Milwaukee. He would live in this apartment until he finally was arrested. Within the years 1990 and 1991, Jeffrey continued doing what he was doing in his grandmother's house. He lured multiple young men that he would meet mostly in gay bars into his apartment. Sometimes he agreed with these men to have sex, sometimes he offered them money in exchange for sex, or just to take like some nude pictures. Sometimes he said to his victims he just wanted to invite them in for some drinks. These were like Jeffrey's general approaches to his victims. Later in the evening, however, Jeffrey would always end up drugging and strangling his victims. Now that he was living alone in the apartment, Jeffrey, of course, again gained the freedom of doing whatever he wanted and nobody would disturb him. So Jeffrey began to explore what he could do with his victims' remains. Jeffrey bought himself a Polaroid camera and took pictures of the bodies of his victims, sometimes placing the bodies in like sexual postures. And Jeffrey still dismembered all of the bodies and separated the flesh from the bones. Now he also started to boil the flesh and organs, and he began to actually eat parts of it. Jeffrey was oftentimes particularly attracted to the victim's skull, and in order to try to preserve the skulls the best he could, he placed multiple skulls of his victims into his freezers. So all of this went on in a pretty busy apartment complex, meaning Jeffrey had a bunch of neighbors. And actually, there were several neighbors who during the years 1990 and 1991 complained to the landlord about an extremely foul smell coming out of Jeffrey's apartment. Jeffrey was contacted by the landlord, however, every single time he came up with a different excuse. Like he said once that his fridge got broken and all of the flesh and all of the meat inside was going bad, it got spoiled, that was what caused the smell. Or another time he would claim that he was housing a bunch of tropical fish and some of them died and that has caused the smell. So nobody ever came to the apartment to actually check on this situation. The landlord just said, okay, fine, just get rid of it, get it done, so nobody will complain anymore. On May 26, 1991, Jeffrey approached a 14-year-old teenage boy on the street. His name was Konorak, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Jeffrey asked the boy if he wanted to make some extra money while posing for some photographs in Jeffrey's apartment. Konorak agreed because he could really use the money, and both of them left off to Jeffrey's apartment. Shortly after Konorak actually had posed for some of the pictures, Jeffrey drugged him and he fell unconscious. While Conrad is unconscious, Jeffrey went on practicing an extremely disgusting act on the young boy. So he drilled like a small hole into the victim's forehead and he poured hydrochloric acid into it. Jeffrey would later say that he wanted to make a zombie out of the young boy, an alive but also lifeless body at the same time, without free will, so he could abuse the body, he could do with him whatever he wants, but the victim would still be alive. So he would basically not decompose, you know what I mean? While Conrad was lying unconscious in the bedroom, Jeffrey was having some beers, and after a while, I guess he ran out of beers, Jeffrey went out of the apartment to go to a local bar. While Jeffrey was out, Conrad actually regained his consciousness, and even though he was in a very difficult state of mind due to the acid in his head, he managed to escape from Jeffrey's apartment and he ran away down the street. When Jeffrey was on the way back from the bar to his apartment, he found Conrad sitting on the side of the street surrounded by 3 women who were extremely worried about the young boy. Jeffrey immediately ran over to the scene and he told the women that Conrad was his 19-year-old boyfriend who was drinking too much that night, that he would just like to take him home now. The women, however, they somehow sensed that something was incredibly wrong. I mean, Conrad was bleeding also from his forehead and he was in a very troubled state of mind, so they had already called the police. The police arrived shortly after, and while Jeffrey was still at the scene, Jeffrey told them the whole story again about Conrad being his 19-year-old boyfriend, he was just drinking too much that night, and he would like to take him home now. Even though the 3 women protested and demanded something must be wrong and needs to be checked on, they were just told by the officers to shut up and to not interfere. The police officers actually still escorted Jeffrey and Conrad to Jeffrey's apartment, and Jeffrey was really close to being exposed at that point. However, once they reached Jeffrey's apartment, Jeffrey left the officers standing at the doorsteps. They did not have any warrant or anything, and he went into the apartment to get the Polaroids he took of Conrad earlier that night. Seeing the photographs, the officers felt like, okay, they got their proof, the 2 men were in a relationship with each other, and they just took off and left. After the officers left, Jeffrey again put hydrochloric acid in Conrad's head, but this time Conrad died from this. Jeffrey called in sick from his work at the chocolate factory, where he was actually still working at that time. He called in sick for the next day in order to devote the full day to the dismemberment of Conrad's body. And he would once again retain the skull of his victim. Until his arrest, Jeffrey had killed a total of 17 young men. On July 22nd, 1991, Jeffrey was in a bar looking for his next victim, and he approached 3 men offering them $100 to come to his apartment in order to take some nude photographs. 2 of the men directly had a bad feeling about this and refused. One of them, however, agreed that he could really use the money and accompanied Jeffrey to his apartment. This man's name was Tracy Edwards, who was 32 years old at the time. Arriving at Jeffrey's apartment, Tracy immediately noticed an extremely foul smell and multiple boxes of hydrochloric acid standing on the floor. Jeffrey explained to Tracy that he used the acid to clean bricks. When Jeffrey was all of a sudden placing a handcuff on Tracy's hand, Tracy was confirmed that something was seriously wrong there, and Jeffrey also noticed Tracy's nervousness, and he started threatening Tracy with a knife, claiming that he would eat his heart. After continuous attempts of Jeffrey attacking Tracy, Tracy claimed that he was his friend, he should just calm down, that he was not going to run away. Tracy, in his mind, he was of course planning to run away, and he was trying to come up with a good escape route, essentially. He decided he would either jump out of a window or he would run through the unlocked front door. He asked Jeffrey if he could use the bathroom, which Jeffrey agreed to. However, unfortunately, there was no window in the bathroom. Afterwards, Jeffrey and Tracy were sitting in the living room watching a movie, and Tracy just waited for a moment where Jeffrey would lose his concentration. That moment came up, and Tracy punched Jeffrey in the face as hard as he could, and he ran through the front door, out of the apartment and onto the street as fast as he could. At 11:30 p.m., Tracy flagged down a police car on the street, and he explained to the officers that some freak had placed a handcuff on his wrist and was threatening to kill him. The officers first tried to remove the handcuff from Tracy's wrist using their own keys, but it did not work. So the officers actually agreed to accompany Tracy back to Jeffrey's apartment just to have a look like what was going on there, and essentially to help Tracy to get rid of the handcuff on his wrist. Arriving at the apartment, Jeffrey agreed to let Tracy and the two officers in, and he confessed that he had placed the handcuff on Tracy's wrist. He did not deliver an explanation as to why, however. Jeffrey told the officers that he would go into his bedroom where he kept the keys. However, the officers told him to back off and went into the bedroom themselves. Of course, the officers also by that time noticed already the extremely foul smell coming from the apartment and also the boxes of hydrochloric acid on the floor. In the bedroom, one of the officers noticed that the bottom drawer of a shelf was being opened, and inside the drawer he discovered numerous Polaroid pictures of human remains in various states of dismemberment. He was looking at the pictures and he discovered that the background the pictures were taken in matched the apartment he was standing in. The officer returned to the living room and showed the pictures to his colleague, telling him that these are for real. Jeffrey was immediately arrested at the scene, and once arrested and escorted to the police car, he mumbled something like, "For what I have done, I should be dead." The officers called for backup, and once the Milwaukee's Criminal Investigation Bureau arrived at the scene, a thorough search of the apartment has been conducted. The officers found the following at the scene: a total of 4 severed heads, 7 skulls, some painted, some bleached, 2 human hearts, a portion of arm muscle, and in the fridge they found an entire torso plus a bag of human organs and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom of the fridge. Furthermore, investigators discovered 2 entire skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed and preserved penises, a mummified scalp, and in a 57-gallon drum standing in the living room, they found 3 dismembered torsos dissolving in an acid solution. In addition to this, a total of 74 Polaroid pictures were found as well. Police immediately began to question Jeffrey. Jeffrey waived his right of having an attorney present, and he said he just wanted to confess. Jeffrey immediately confessed to killing a total of 17 young men, including his very first victim, Stephen Hicks, back in 1978. Jeffrey did not only confess to the murders, he also admitted to have engaged in acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. Jeffrey really was ready to talk, and he conducted a lot of interviews during the year he was arrested. When asked the question as to why his number of victims increased so much within a short period of time, Jeffrey said, "It was an incessant and never-ending desire to be with someone at whatever cost. Someone good-looking, really nice-looking. It just filled my thoughts all day long." He also said that he was in the process of creating an altar full of human skulls, which he was planning to display on a black table inside of his living room. Jeffrey said that the altar would have been his place of meditation, and he said if the arrest would have happened 6 months later, this is what they would have found. Jeffrey was initially charged with 15 counts of murder. He would later be charged for the murder of his first victim, Stephen Hicks, and he was never charged with the murder of Stephen Tuomi, since there was no concrete evidence pointing to him, and as stating earlier, Jeffrey was not able to remember that he actually killed him. And there was also no confession. On January 13, 1992, Jeffrey pleaded guilty but insane to all counts of murder. This plea removed the need for a criminal trial, and the only thing that needed to be confirmed was if Jeffrey was deemed sane or insane by the time of committing the crimes. The trial about Jeffrey's sanity began on January 30th, 1992, and it mostly consisted of testimonies from psychiatrists regarding Jeffrey's mental state. Dr. Becker, who diagnosed Jeffrey as a necrophiliac, stated, "He has a mental disease. This is what drives his behavior." Dr. Fred Berlin said, "If this isn't mental illness, from my point of view, I don't know what is." Dr. George Palermo, a court-appointed psychiatrist, said that Jeffrey suffered from antisocial personality disorders, but he did not find him that he met the legal definition of insanity. Now it was up to a panel of 12 jurors to decide if Jeffrey would be sent to prison when he was deemed sane, or he was to a mental institution if he was deemed to be insane. On February 12, 1992, 10 out of the 12 jurors found Jeffrey to be sane while committing the crimes, and Jeffrey was sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, and he later received another life sentences for the first murder in Ohio. Jeffrey was transferred to Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, where he started serving his prison sentence. So Jeffrey is sitting in prison, and on the morning of November 28, 1994, Jeffrey was assigned to get some maintenance work done in the prison gym showers, along with two fellow inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. Now usually there was always a prison guard around to supervise the inmates. However, on this particular day, the three of them were unsupervised for approximately 20 minutes. At 8:10 a.m., Jeffrey was found lying face down in the ground of the prison showers, along with his fellow inmate Jesse Anderson. Jeffrey was still alive at this point, and he was immediately brought into the hospital, where he died only 1 hour later. Jesse Anderson also died 2 days later. Both of the men were bludgeoned over the head with a 20-inch metal bar. Now, Christopher Scarver immediately confessed to the crime. He confessed that he first attacked Jeffrey before moving on to Jesse, and he took full responsibility of the crime. He claimed that God told him to do so. Jeffrey stated in his will that he wants no services to be conducted at his funeral, and he would like to have his body cremated. So his body was cremated, and his ashes were divided between his parents. The Oxford Apartments at North 25th Street, where Jeffrey committed most of his crimes, were demolished in 1992, and to this day are only a vacant lot. Jeffrey's father, Lionel, still lives married to his second wife, Sherry, and both of them refuse to change their last name, as they claim they still feel love for Jeffrey as a son, despite of what he did. Jeffrey's mother, Joyce, died in the year 2000 of cancer, and it is believed that she tried at least one more time to take her own life before. Jeffrey's brother, David, changed his last name, and he is living in anonymity. And this basically is the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, and we are finally coming to an end here. I know this has been a longer one, and I really still did not go into the whole story in detail. I mean, there is so much to say. There is just so much material out there to research. Like, of course, I could have spoken about every single victim in detail, but I think the story has also been told, and I also didn't want to make it too graphic, if that makes sense. So of course I do want to express my deepest sympathy to all the victims' families, and those people have just been taken out of their lives so young and so senselessly. Jeffrey Dahmer's case is one of the most popular true crime cases of all time. There are countless books out there, there are TV shows, there are movies, and also the most recent show, it's called Dahmer on Netflix. It brought this case even more to the spotlight today, and this is also why I chose to talk about it today. As always, I look forward to your opinions in the comments. What do you think about this case? Do you think Jeffrey was insane? Do you think he was sane by the time he committed the crimes? To be honest, I'm really torn because Jeffrey also said in one of the interviews that he claims full responsibility. He does not blame his actions on his background. He does not blame it on any mental illness. And he took full ownership up to his decisions. I think he knew exactly what he did. Of course, it makes him a horrible person. But I do think that actually he was in the right state of mind while committing those crimes. So I would really appreciate if you would like this video, if you would subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time. Bye.